Welcome to the Hoosier Basketball Experience. We're here again this week with Don Fischer, and we're so fortunate to be able to talk with him about so many things that make up the Hoosier Basketball Experience. In this case, his announcing at Indiana University. And when we come back, you'll learn how this legendary announcer prepared for all those games over the last 48 years of announcing.
The Hoosier Basketball Trivia Question, sponsored by Christy, Farrell, Lee, and Bell. Serious injury isn't what we do, it's all we do. Today's question: Indiana teams have had unique mascots. What was the mascot for Dunkirk High School? The answer after the break. Now our trivia question answered, sponsored by Christy, Farrell, Lee, and Bell. Serious injury isn't what we do, it's all we do. Today's question: Indiana teams have had unique mascots. What was the mascot for Dunkirk High School? The answer: the Speed Cats.
Don, welcome back to the Hoosier Basketball Experience.
Thanks, Phil. I appreciate it.
Hey, I want to talk about what goes into the preparation of your broadcast. I know people think maybe you just sit down at the mic and it flows, and I know it's more involved than that. Talk about the preparation.
Well, in basketball is much easier to prepare for than football.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, because football, you've got 60, 70, 80 players, depending on, the team and who you're playing and how many players they play and that kind of thing. You're preparing for a lot of different individuals on top of just doing the play-by-play itself. But preparation is, like any job, you have to prepare to do a broadcast. And the preparation involves so many different things, but primarily it involves you studying the team that you're going to be playing against, because you already know,
once you get used to your team.
Yeah, I've been used to my team for a long time, for doing it for 48 years. I'm pretty knowledgeable about what Indiana's doing all the time, and I go to practices, I watch practices, just to get familiar with names and numbers, especially in football. In basketball, you watch just to see what they're doing and how they're progressing, those kinds of things. Coach Knight was kind enough to let me go to a few practices in my day. I did get tossed out of practice 3 different times.
Or did you talk?
No, I didn't talk. I didn't say a word. I was smart enough never to sit with anybody, number one. And number two, most of those times I got tossed, I was the only other person in the gym besides the staff, managers, and those kinds of people. And Coach wanted to say something to his players he didn't want me to hear.
I bet that's exactly what it was.
So I got, Fischer,
out.
And I did. I promptly left, but I was always allowed to come to practice, which was a really cool thing. But preparation also involves familiarizing yourself with the details of other players on the other team, making sure you know their background, calling the sports information director for the other school and talking to him and getting insights from him on what their team looks like right now, if somebody's hurt, those kinds of things. And maybe more importantly than anything else, how to pronounce names.
Right.
And I've always wrote down phonetically how you pronounce somebody's name.
Sure.
And I'll even screw up the phonetics now and then, because there are some names out there. Who was it? Victor Zigamazago or something like that.
I thought you were going to say Oladipo, but you got that one down.
Oladipo was fine. That wasn't a problem. But there were a few names throughout the years.
Sure.
And we did
Eastern Europeans.
Well, we did some Eastern Europeans. You guys played exhibition games against the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing, the number of different kinds of names that you have to learn to pronounce.
Sure.
And you don't do it for a lifetime. In other words, you're studying those names for one game.
Sure.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it involves a lot of preparation. And so much of it, I learn better when I write something down after I see it, that kind of thing, especially names and numbers, those kinds of things. So again, the preparation time, and generally in basketball, you have maybe 3 days to get ready for the next game. So you don't have a lot of time to prepare, and you take as much time as you have to, whether it's staying up late at night or if you go to practice. Exactly. So it's no different than anybody else's job. Whatever you do in life, from a job perspective, you need to be prepared for it.
Yeah, we certainly had that lesson with Coach Knight, and it applies to every walk of life, really.
Absolutely.
You mentioned in our last broadcast Max Skirvin, and of course when I was playing it was you and Max Skirvin and Joe Smith, and that was a heck of a team. Talk a little bit about how that team worked and how you worked together.
Well, Max, of course, was more of a stat guy. I mean, he would do color commentary and talk a little bit about what was going on the floor, but he always liked to throw in all the statistics. Joe Smith on our broadcast, back in the day when we first started out, he only did statistics.
Sure.
He didn't do pregame stuff, halftime or postgame. He simply did stats, hand them over to Max or to me in a ball game. In other words, if they were on a scoring streak of 6 or 7 points and nobody was able to counter that, I would get a note on that type of thing. So, but Joe then evolved into kind of a pregame, halftime, postgame host.
Right.
For some part of those.
Some interviews.
Yeah. He rarely did he do the interviews as much as he did do an interview. Now he does an interview for the Governor's Cup update where he interviews another coach from another sport, that kind of thing. But generally, Joe does the cleanup work in a sense of getting the pregame show, getting it started, that kind of thing after we do our open for each broadcast. Max was really, really good at understanding his role. You know, even though he didn't like the fact that he was taken off the play-by-play, and I understand that completely, because if I'd have been taken off, I would have felt the same exact way. But he understood his role, and he took responsibility for it, wanted to do a good job at it, and he always did an excellent job. He was the quintessential professional in that regard.
You guys were just awesome. So, so many great moments that you've had the opportunity to announce over the years. There are just way too many for us to talk about, but we obviously have to talk about the championship years. And give us at least one memory from each of those years, 76, 81, and 87. What's your most memorable moment about each one of those championship games?
Well, the 76 national championship, you just had the feeling these guys were going to do it. They were going to go unbeaten. They were going to get it done. Why? Because there were 2 overtime games in that 76 season, one at Kentucky and one against Indiana and Michigan at home. And both those games went into overtime, and both games were decided after a tip-in by Ken Benson that knocked in a ball that went down and sent it into overtime, and Indiana dominated the overtime in both of those ball games. But you just had a feeling about the 76 team and that they were going to get it done. And to my memory, the thing that stands out to me most about 76 was that championship game. Bobby Wilkerson goes down in the first half with a concussion. The team comes back, and they're kind of in chaotic mode, so to speak. They don't play as well as they could the rest of the first half. And I think they were down by a couple of points at halftime.
I think they were.
So they go to the second half, and it was like a train, unable to stop a train because Indiana just took off, and they were going to win it, and you knew they were going to win it. And it was a dominant performance. But the last 2 minutes of that game, Coach Knight took out those seniors one by one. And the starters one by one.
Getting
Tommy
to announce
Abernathy,
that, how great was that?
It was the most, I mean, it was so emotional. I mean, I got tears running down my cheeks as I'm broadcasting that. It was so exciting, so emotional for those kids, and it was so emotional for the entire fan base, because the year before, they went 31-1, got beat by Kentucky in the regional at Dayton, and, you know, nobody wanted to see that happen, of course. It was Kentucky. But this time, Indiana was able to do exactly what they anticipated they could do, and they did it.
What about our 81 team?
Well, to me, there were 2 important parts to that game. Just before halftime, Indiana was trailing, hadn't led in this ball game at all against North Carolina.
There's a shot in the corner.
Yes, there was. Randy Whitman, who's still my all-time favorite player, because I knew Randy about the time we got to Indianapolis to get this job in '73. I can't remember how old he was, but it had to be around 10 or 11, whatever.
That's exactly right.
And I met him through his family. Bob and Shirley Whitman were his parents, and that whole family kind of took my family in. We went to the same church over on the west side that first year. And Randy quickly, you know, I didn't know he was going to be a star at Indiana at that point, but that family was we were so close to that family and what they did for us. So Randy Whitman, just before halftime of that game, gets a pass in the corner. He puts up a 16-foot jump shot, buries it, and Indiana's got its first lead of that ball game. Then Indiana comes out to start the second half, and who goes to work but Isaiah Thomas at the defensive end, steals 2 balls, I think on the first 2 possessions by North Carolina, goes down for layups in each one, and Indiana was off to the races. It was those 2 moments of that ball game were the most special from my perspective, just because they were critical.
Yeah. Talk about the 1987 team, and we'll talk about a little bit about it before the break and a little bit after, but best memory from that championship game?
Well, the best memory is Keith Smart.
Sure.
Because he knocks down this shot, and really kind of an uncharacteristic shot, because he was not, didn't seem like he was under control, but he drove to the baseline and kind of threw up this shot as he was going out of bounds, you know.
Shot heard around the world.
And it went down. And nobody, here's what I remember most about that. Nobody from Syracuse called timeout.
Oh, yeah.
And we still don't know to this day, because Coach Knight asked the officials, who called that timeout? Because in those days, I think only players could call timeout.
That's right. So we're going to call a timeout right now, but when we come back, more with Don Fischer. And we're back with Don Fischer. We were just talking about the 1987 championship game, and Don, I won't make you pick which one of these teams was the best, but talk a little bit about the 1987 coaching job that you think Coach Knight did that year.
Well, if you looked at those 3 national championship teams, the 87 team was the least talented of that group. And I'm not putting those kids down because they were terrific players and they did a great job. But Coach Knight, you know, and they were coming back from the season on the break, if everybody remembers that. Yeah. And a couple of years before that, they knocked off North Carolina and then get beat by Virginia in the regional there that time. And that kind of team was kind of in some turmoil back in the mid 80s like that. And then all of a sudden they find themselves in 87. And they found themselves because Coach Knight basically took a team that was limited and was able to find a way to get those guys to play together, understand their roles.
The system worked.
The system worked perfectly.
Yeah.
And it worked to perfection that year, especially in those championship games. Now, granted, Syracuse had a chance to win that game.
Sure, yeah,
Derek
absolutely.
Coleman's at the free throw line, and he misses a free throw that would have changed the whole outcome of that contest, or probably would have. But it gave Indiana the opportunity to win it, and Indiana took advantage of it. They always have somebody step up at crunch time and make a play.
Sure.
And that was characteristic of Coach Knight's best basketball teams. They found ways to win ball games even when it looked the bleakest.
Yeah.
I mean, they dominated some tournaments too. I mean, that 81 team was as dominant as any team has ever been in the NCAA tournament from beginning to end of the tournament.
Point spread.
But when you looked at what Coach Knight was able to do with these guys, that's what he was so brilliant at, Phil. And you know this as a former player. He could break down film like no other. And I'm not talking about assistant coaches breaking it down.
No, he did it till 2 or 3 in the morning.
Yeah, some video guy coming in and breaking it down and then showing you clips. Coach Knight did all that himself in those days. And I'm not saying that there weren't coaches that looked at film too.
Sure.
But he was
studied.
He was just phenomenal.
Prepared.
Exactly. And he knew what to look for. His ability to adjust within basketball games, his ability to find the weaknesses of other teams and then exploit those weaknesses with the kids that he had. That's why. And Coach Knight may have been difficult to deal with at times and all that kind of things, but there was never a basketball coach, in my opinion, who has ever lived at the college level who was better than Coach Knight.
Well,
Nobody.
Well, agreed. I've got to take you back to the 81 team because I was there and ask you about what was going through your team's mind for the broadcast when you found out that President Reagan had been shot.
Well, the thing that we were all scared about was that they were going to cancel the games. And everybody was thinking about that and talking about it and talking about that possibility. And I know Coach Knight and had prepared you guys for whatever was going to take place in that regard too. But from a broadcast perspective, we were all up in the air. And of course, our radio station's calling us and going, well, what have you heard?
Yeah.
You know, you get a call every 10 minutes. I haven't heard anything different than the last 10 minutes you called. I'll call you when something happens.
We were the same way. We were in the locker room. We
Right.
still didn't know.
Yeah.
Still did not know.
So to me, that's what everybody was concerned about. But at the same time, we just kind of thought, this is America. We're going to get through this, and helping us get through this would be the playing of a championship game in the NCAA tournament.
You know, somebody came in the locker room, and I don't think this was true, but it almost looked like a Secret Service person. Somebody, I didn't know who it was. And they whispered to somebody, and somebody whispered to somebody else, and one of the assistant coaches said, President Reagan is out of surgery, is awake and doing well, and says he wants you to play the game. We thought, let's go, let's go. So that was awesome.
That is awesome.
I don't know if it was true or not, but really fun. So you talked a little bit about dealing with Coach Knight on the radio show. Give us a couple anecdotes about stories on the radio show, the good and the bad.
Well, Coach Knight, as everybody knows, Coach Knight tried to be funny a lot.
Yeah.
And at times it came off, and at other times it didn't come off so well. But one of the things that he loved to, he just did different stuff. He did stuff that nobody else would probably ever think of doing on the radio. He literally, the last few years we did the show, he would come home from practice, get to his house at 7 o'clock. We go on the air at 7:05. He'd get to his house at 7 o'clock. He would sit down at the dinner table, and Karen would have a meal prepared for him, and he would sit down and start eating. And if he wasn't done eating, he would continue to eat as we opened the show, and you'd ask him his first question. He would be eating there. You could hear the clank of a fork and a knife. You could hear him chewing at times, that kind of stuff. He did stuff like that. And you just had to laugh because it was silly. But he did a lot of other things that were different too. One of the worst things he ever did to me on the radio show, we were halfway through the show. We take a break for commercial. And so we get back from the commercial break, and I start my intro to the second half of the show, and welcome back. Coach Knight's alongside us. And Coach, this person asked a question, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I said, what do you think about that? And there's no answer. And I'm sitting there going.
It's a stupid question, probably.
No, I go, Coach Knight, are you there? And the next thing you hear is the toilet flush. Just, I mean, think about it.
Yeah, you can't make that up.
No, you can't make it up. So he did stuff like that. It wasn't like that all the time.
Sure.
But the first few years we did the talk show, we had a lavalier mic, so he could attach it just like we got a microphone just right here, okay? He didn't want to put that on. So he would put it down here on the side. You know, he sat in the couch, in the corner of the couch there in the cave, and he would sit there. He put the lavalier mic down. And, well, half the time you couldn't hardly hear what he was saying. And I said, Coach, we can't hear you. Can you hear us? Yeah, Fischer, I can hear you. And so he'd pick it up for a second. He'd lay it on his lap. And if it didn't fall down, that's where it would stay the rest of the night. I mean, he did crazy stuff like that.
Hilarious.
And he wanted to be comfortable in his domain.
Sure, absolutely.
And he didn't care what it sounded like. And
Absolutely.
But here's the funniest thing about doing a talk show with Bob Knight. He never wanted to do one until 1981. That's the first year we did a talk show. You know what happened the summer before that?
Summer before, in 80?
Yeah, you wouldn't know this. He's talking to Dean Smith.
CBS.
He's talking to Dean Smith on the phone.
Yeah.
Dean Smith has a talk show, and Dean Smith asked Knight, he says, Coach, are you doing a talk show? And Knight says, no, I'm not doing a talk show. Dean Smith goes, Coach, you can make a lot extra money doing a talk show.
Yeah.
So he comes on the middle of of a conversation I'm having with our general manager. He calls me, Fischer, because I'd asked him 3 or 4 times prior to this to do it.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I'm never doing a talk show. He says, Fischer. I said, yeah, Coach. He says, what do you think about us doing a talk show? I said, Coach, I've been asking you about that for the last 5 years. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, find out from your general manager how much they're going to pay me, and we'll see if we're going to do a talk show or not. hangs up the phone.
And did you do the talk show all the way through till he was terminated?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, we did it. And we did it in different ways. The first year and a half, we did it on the phone with people who actually called. And then halfway through the second season on the air with that talk show, he said during a commercial break, "You tell your boss that we're never taking another phone call on this show again. And if we are, I'm not doing it."
So did you have these were live radio shows or
Yes,
taped?
they were all live.
They were live.
Yep.
And did you have the blooper button?
No, we did not have the blooper button.
Okay.
And we only had to use that one time.
Is that right?
And we didn't get it in time. And I won't tell you that
Was
story.
it you or Coach?
It was, well, the blooper button was probably my responsibility because we didn't have a blooper button.
Yeah.
And so I had no way to shut him off.
Yeah.
But he dropped the barrel of a shotgun on the concrete floor. It just exploded. It sounded like it just exploded. And I said, "Coach," and he goes, "I'm not going to tell you the word he said."
All right.
But he said a word, as you know, and it pretty
Yeah.
much got me in trouble.
All right. Well, when we come back, we'll have more with Don Fischer. We're going to talk about how technology has changed in the broadcasting world when we come back. Thanks for joining us on the Hoosier Basketball Experience. Don, I've got to let you close, talk about how exciting it is to have Woody and Dane Fife and this coaching staff come in at IU.
Well, it's tremendously exciting. There's no question about that. Scott Dolson, the new athletic director, has done a phenomenal job of making the transition, helping with Thad Mata coming in as well as part of that staff. This is going to be a lot of fun for Indiana basketball fans, and we're doing this right after the Bahamas trip, which was pretty successful, 2-0.
Good. See you next week on the Hoosier Basketball Experience.